theme in the recent 2 or 3 assembly sessions. Do you remember? Richness of experience, richness of life. Asking questions in order to enhance your life. We took off from Heidegger's idea that interrogation or asking questions is a discipline basic to the preservation-enhancement of human life. So that's our overall theme. We are sort of moving left and right, crisscrossing a bit in order to get an idea, a sense of this very important insight. And we are still trying to do that. And I want you to know that an idea really has no limits. And today I'm going to develop some thoughts with you which would require very intense concentration and imaginative participation on your part. Okay? Because now you are no longer school children. You've been initiated into St. Stephen's College. That's why I always address you as ladies and gentlemen. In the school, you were always addressed children, right? I've been on the governing body of several schools. I've visited schools in their hundreds, so I know what happens in schools. You're not in a school anymore, which means that your level of thinking and exploration must undergo a quantum leap, right? So I'm going to treat you at that level. So please pay attention, concentrate, try to understand, register as much as you can. Then, when you have time in the course of the day, return to these strands of thought and assimilate. Use so that these concepts and insights become operative part of your own thinking apparatus, right? That is how something is actually truly assimilated. Now, in today's reading, there is an expression, which is the last verse, which says, be perfect, right? What's the expression? Be perfect. So we're going to fix our attention on this particular expression. All right? Be perfect. Now I'm going to connect this to Heidegger and say that when we interrogate, when we ask questions with the intention to enhance our being, who we are, our life, and through that the lives of others, the destination we need to keep within us or in the zone of our awareness is the destination called perfection, right? Perfection will never be a realized state. We will never attain perfection so that we can rest in perfection. Perfection is a goal towards which we must continually move, so that life is an unending pilgrimage after perfection. Okay? Now, how shall we understand this? Very often what happens is that all these things are articulated, they are said, they are proclaimed, they are written on the pages of the book, but we really do not engage with these expressions and understand for ourselves what it means. Today, taking a little help from Plato and a little more help from Hegel, don't worry about these names. I'm going to try and explain to you what this involves. What does this quest for self-enhancement, not self-aggrandizement, right? self-enhancement involved. Now, I'm going to enter into the concept. Okay? Let me begin with Plato. Plato says that there is a realm of ideas where whatever you see in the phenomenal world, the world that you see around you, every object has a corresponding phenomenon that exists in its perfection. That's the world, or that's the realm of ideas. The capital I, ideas. Now, everything in this world is an imitation of, a replica of those ideas. For example, there is an idea, capital I, of table. Right? Now, if the idea of table did not exist in that realm of the ideal, upon this earth there would have been no table. Okay? But there is a problem. The problem is that whatever we create out of our intuition of the idea or ideas will never be exactly the same as the idea. I'm going to put that in different words so that you understand. When we imitate, the product of our imitation will be inferior to what we imitate. For example, today we imitate the West. By imitating the West, we are silently proclaiming that they are superior and we are inferior. Right? This is why I always tell you, don't imitate others. Be authentic. You understand the logic? No imitation can be as perfect as the original. Right? You take a great work of art, you imitate it, and the product will be laughably poor. And between the ideal and the objects that you handle, the things that you see around you, including yourself, there is a pathetic difference. Now, there is, for example, the idea of man. What is it? The idea of man. Without that idea, he will not exist. For example, when this college was created, an architect was called, his name was Walter George, and Walter George created the idea in the form of drawings, right? And we still preserve that in the office. And the college came into being following that idea. All right? But the idea of Walter George is still not idea with a capital I, it's idea with a small I. You understand? Therefore, it is possible to bring about a commendable convergence or harmony or unity between that idea and the corresponding object. You understand? As the idea becomes more and more sublime, it becomes more and more difficult to imitate. For example, you can imitate a drawing done by one of your friends. But you cannot imitate a picture, a portrait by Raphael or Titian or Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo or whatever, right? Because the more sublime, the more difficult to imitate. John Keats said that imitating Milton is death, right? My students of literature will know this. Imitating Milton is death because he's a sublime poet. You understand? Now, if you've grasped this, I'll take you to the next step, which is, it's only because there is a gulf between the idea, capital I, and its manifestations in the phenomenal world, the world that we live in, that there are multiple expressions of the idea. For example, if what we create corresponding to the idea of a table is exactly the same as the idea of the table, there will be only one table in the world. Have you understood? Well, it will take a little while. That's why I'm going very slowly. Don't worry about it. But it's extremely important that you begin to now think on a higher level. Otherwise, you will stay stuck. Right? You're not intellectual babies anymore. So, because there is a disparity between the original idea, the capital idea, the Platonic idea, which will never change, it is once and for all, which is beyond the passage of time, because there is a difference between the original idea and its expression in time and space, right? There is a possibility of multiple expressions. So there are thousands and millions of tables. You understand? Now suppose it's possible to have a human being who is the exact embodiment of the idea of the human being. There will be only one human being on earth. The fact that there are nearly 7 billion human beings on planet Earth means that all of us are woefully away from, pathetically different from, the idea of being human. All right? Otherwise, there would have been only one person, the perfect man. You understand? Now, therefore, the first thing that we have to remember is, this is why enhancement is important. I'm trying to give you the logical explanation for it. Okay? The first thing to grasp is that between the ideal and the real, there is always a difference. Is that understood? Have you understood that much? Okay? Between the idea of the table and the actual table, there is a difference. There is no perfect table. Such a thing does not exist. Alright? In comparison to the idea of the table. Alright? The second thing. Now, in the case of human beings, as against material objects, there is a further problem. And that further problem is, it is possible to manifest the idea in this world as a concept, the concept of man. We still do not know what the idea of man is. We only have the concept of man. So we can have some idea about what does it mean to be human. That much we can develop. That's called the concept. Alright? Now, this concept generates a reality. Alright? So there is the idea of man, alright? And then there is a reality of being a human being. Alright? Now I am a human being, I am not an idea. So the idea of being human is different from, the concept of being human is different from the idea of being human with a capital I. Okay? It corresponds to that, but it is not the same. But the reality of my life, the reality of my being a human being is still different from the concept of being a human being. Have you understood this? Alright? Now, the distance between the concept of being a human being and the reality of being a human being is the distance of our imperfection. and our poverty. Have you understood that? I'll repeat. The distance or the difference between the concept of being a human being and the reality or the embodiment or the expression in flesh and blood of that concept in the form of a Wilson. There is always a difference. And the difference will vary. Sometimes the difference may be small, sometimes the difference will be very large, so large that it looks a contradiction. So sometimes you say, when you get angry, you abuse people taking the name of animals, no? In many languages, these are abuses. I don't want to give you a lecture on patterns of abuse. I have need to learn at your feet. So there is always a difference between concept and reality, okay? And that difference is the measure of our poverty. In other words, if you can grow in such a manner that the reality of your life, the reality of who you are, corresponds as closely as possible to the concept of being a human being, then you are rich. Then you are rich, and that's called enrichment or enhancement. So the kind of questions we have to ask will all belong to this gap, this space. What is the space? The space between the concept of being a human being and the reality of your day-to-day life. Now, therefore, you have to first develop at least a rudimentary understanding of what it means to be a human being. Now, without that understanding, how in the world can you ask questions of enhancement? Do you understand the problem? This is the heart of the matter. What is the heart of the matter? What is the heart of the matter? Lup, tup, lup, tup. Is that heart of the matter? That's your heart. The heart of the matter is that the questions that we need to ask, right, are not questions like, shall we go for a cup of tea in the cafe? Shall we go and see a late night film? Shall we play a prank? These are not questions of enhancement. How do you know that these are not questions of enhancement? You may feel happy about it depending on your inclination or mood at that time when you ask such questions. But how do you know that these are not indeed questions of self-enhancement? It's only by understanding that the very purpose of education, and in fact the very purpose of life itself, is to bridge the gulf between the concept and the reality. All right? Now, when the gulf or the gap or the contradiction between concept and reality is bridged, Hegel says it becomes an actuality. So, actuality in Hegel is a higher concept than reality. The real need not be actual. Okay? The real need not be actual. Now understand the third part of my argument. When there is a gulf between the concept and the reality, it expresses itself in all kinds of forms. One is the obsession with appearance. What is it? The obsession with appearance. It's always appearance versus reality. Hegel would say that that's not the correct concept or correct formulation. It should be appearance versus actuality. You understand why? It should not be appearance versus reality. It should be appearance versus actuality. Because actuality is a result of the harmony between concept and reality. All right? Now, when you are not able to negotiate, when you are not able to manage the gulf between concept and reality, what happens? Your strategy is, rather than try and bridge it, you resort to the easier option of putting up appearances, giving yourself airs. You see? Trying to cover up your poverty with externals. That is why fashions are so important. In fact, fashions thrive only because of this contradiction. In a world, in a society of authentic people, those in the fashion industry will have to shut shop. You will not need the fig leaves of fashions in order to feel nice about yourself. Anyway, you don't feel nice about yourself with the resources of this showbiz. You don't. You can only spend money. You never feel nice about it. You may go around showing yourself off, but you feel actually very cheap and poor and miserable. Of course, you don't have the courage to admit that yourself. For God's sake, understand what I am trying to explain to you, because you will never hear it from any other source. I'm going to briefly summarize, okay? Because it's important that you are very clear on this. I borrowed an idea from Plato, and I said that there is a realm of ideas, a realm of perfection, a realm of permanence. Nothing will change. What is perfect will not change. What is imperfect must change. All right? And then, when that idea finds its embodiment in space and time through the material medium, you have within that realm a concept that corresponds to the idea. But the concept is inferior to the idea, with a capital I. Right? Now, this concept must then take the next step, which is to enflesh itself and become what? Reality. That is why we say flesh and blood reality. All right? Concept is intangible, non-material, whereas reality is concrete, tangible, flesh and blood reality. All right? And as you come down this ladder, you become less and less perfect. Your distance from the ideal increases. All right? And that distance is the measure of your poverty, the poverty of your being. And the fundamental duty of a human being is to address that poverty and try to eradicate it as best we can. And education is one of the most important means given to us, available to us, to eradicate that poverty. And therefore, a sound approach to education must train young people in the art of asking relevant questions. That's why for the last 6 weeks, I have been talking to you on one word, which is ask. Why? Because it is so important. It is so important. Okay? There are many more things I wanted to say, but time will not allow me to do it. Please, I request you, please recollect what I have said. The video recording will be available to you on the internet. Learn to meditate on these things. Make them part of your sensibility, your vision for life, your mindset, your worldview, and walk in that direction. Life will have a very different flavor at that time. Okay?